Did you know that the ordinary white granules melting quietly in your tea in your kitchen or found in every sweet thing you ate were once the most strategic resource for which empires fought, billions of people died, and the foundations of the modern world economy were laid? Although we see sugar today as a very cheap calorie source found in every market at very low prices, between the 16th and 18th centuries, sugar, known as white gold, just like the salt I discussed in my previous video, was the most luxurious consumer item that kings competed for with their treasures. The story of sugar is not just a story of a flavoring agent. It is the very point where global trade, colonialism, and even the modern capitalism we know today were born. Before this crystallized power seized human history like a sweet poison, it was discovered as a local plant in the untouched jungles of New Guinea. However, the human brain's addiction to sweetness would turn this local plant into the greatest economic engine in history. When sugar's global journey began in India and reached the Islamic world, a great revolution took place. Muslim scholars established water mills and complex irrigation systems to process sugarcane. However, sugar was a product whose production was incredibly challenging and required heavy labor. European knights who discovered this white powder during the Crusades turned this luxury food they brought back with them into a status symbol. While honey was used as a sweetener in Europe at that time, the crystallized form of sugar became the new name for wealth and power. With the discovery of the New World, European powers turned the humid lands of the Caribbean and Brazil into massive sugar factories. Sugarcane was a delicate plant that required a tropical climate and continuous heavy labor to grow. But the demand for this plant in Europe reached such a frantic point that the darkest and most organized trade network in history was established to meet it: the Transatlantic Slave Trade. Sugar was no longer just a food item. It had become a ruthless financial monster that drove ships across the ocean, tore people from the heart of Africa, and consumed them in the plantations of the Caribbean. Great banks grew by investing in sugar, and insurance companies were founded with the promise of keeping sugar ships safe. In this episode, we will examine in depth how sugar went from a humble plant to an indispensable part of the European aristocracy, how the plantation economy gave birth to modern financial systems, and how these sweet crystals reshaped the global economy with blood and profit. Although the taste of sugar lingers on the palate, the economic traces it left are still felt in every corner of the global map and in every bank account. Now let's begin to turn the sweetest but darkest pages of history. Could a food item be more valuable than human dignity? We will look for the answer to this question together in the bloody fields of the Caribbean. You will see the true price of this white gold in the rest of the video. Don't go anywhere. At the beginning of the 17th century, sugar had become more than just a sweetener for the European aristocracy. It was the most concrete display of pure power and wealth. When the massive ships arriving from the Caribbean docked at the ports, the white crystals inside were literally considered equivalent to their weight in gold. At that time, sugar was so rare and precious that noble families kept their sugar in gold or silver boxes sealed with sugar stamps, as if they were jewels. During this period, creating sugar sculptures in European palaces became a show of strength. The massive palace models, mythological figures, and flower gardens carved entirely from sugar that appeared on banquet tables symbolized the host's economic influence over the empire. When guests broke off a piece of these sculptures, they realized how powerful the host was to be able to destroy such a vast fortune. However, this sweet wealth also had an unexpected and tragic side effect on the aristocracy: tooth decay. As sugar consumption increased, the teeth of the European elite began to rot and turn jet black. Yet even this situation turned into a status symbol. Black teeth were considered proof that a person was wealthy enough to afford sugar, and even those who wanted to appear rich painted their teeth black with charcoal. Sugar was a sharp knife separating social classes. While the aristocracy drank their tea and coffee sweetened with silver spoons, the working class could only see this luxury in their dreams. But sugar was changing not only the tables, but also the urban structure of Europe. Tea, coffee, and chocolate, which arrived alongside sugar, led to the birth of what we call public spaces today: coffee houses. The foundations of modern democracy and the world of finance were laid in these places where sweetened coffees were sipped. So, what kind of impact did this luxury consumption craze have on the rest of the European people? As sugar prices dropped, did this white gold slip from the hands of the aristocracy and turn into the opium of the masses? This transition of sugar between classes brought with it revolutions and great social changes. Do you think a society's eating habits can change its political destiny? If the answer to this question interests you, don't forget to like the video before we move on to the most crucial point: how sugar financed the Industrial Revolution. In the next chapter, we will see how sugar turned not only palates, but also the gears of factories. If you're ready, let's dive into the depths of this sweet revolution.
Towards the end of the 18th century, sugar was no longer just for the fancy boxes of wealthy families. It had transformed into a fuel that turned the humming gears of factories. In the smoky and dark cities of the Industrial Revolution, for the lower working class who worked more than 15 hours a day, sugar was the cheapest and fastest energy-giving nutritional source available. These crystals, once a status symbol for the aristocracy, had now become the gasoline for the millions sweating in the factories of the British Empire. The combination of tea and sugar gave a temporary vigor to the exhausted bodies of workers, keeping them at their tasks. This was history's first energy drink revolution. However, behind this cheap energy lay the lives of millions of people ground down in the plantations of the Caribbean. The faster the sugarcane grinding machines ran, the faster the vaults of the banks in London filled up, and the more smoke the factory chimneys blew. Sugar was also one of the first architects of the modern financial system. The massive risks of transatlantic trade gave birth to the insurance and stock market systems we use today. The sinking of a sugar ship was not just the sinking of a cargo to the bottom of the ocean, it also meant the bankruptcy of thousands of investors. Therefore, the risk had to be distributed. This necessity matured joint stock companies and financial markets, the heart of modern capitalism. The massive revenues obtained from sugar did not just build mansions for the rich, it also financed the development of steam engines, the construction of railroads, and the growth of textile factories. It was said that the Industrial Revolution ran on coal, but what fed the hands that dug that coal was the sugar coming from the Caribbean. White gold had now turned into actual blood flowing through the veins of the global economy. However, every revolution creates its own victims. As the price of sugar dropped, its consumption became a necessity, and its production turned into an industrial massacre. As machines evolved, the slavery system on plantations became more mechanical and more ruthless. Sugar had changed not only palates, but an entire global production model from top to bottom. Do you think the speed and productivity craze of the modern world could actually be a legacy of this sweet addiction? As we continue to trace sugar through the sooty smoke of the factories, we will examine the path leading to the collapse of this massive economic machine in the next part. Don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments to see more closely how sugar designed the modern world. If you're ready, let's take a deeper dive into the sooty and sugary pages of the Industrial Revolution.
By the beginning of the 20th century, sugar had moved beyond being just an energy source and had transformed into the most strategic and profitable weapon of the global food industry. Emerging from the sooty factories of the Industrial Revolution, these white crystals began to sneak into processed foods after being reformulated in laboratories. The modern story of sugar was no longer written only on plantations, but in the boardrooms and lobbying activities of massive corporations. In the 1960s, the sugar industry succeeded in diverting attention from sugar's devastating effects by funding research that claimed fat was the primary cause of heart disease. This was one of the greatest scientific manipulations in history. To maintain the taste of low-fat products, more sugar was added to foods, triggering the modern epidemic of obesity, diabetes, and metabolic diseases. Today, sugar awaits us on every market shelf, in every drink, and even in sauces we least expect. These crystals, whose effect on the brain is powerful enough to be compared to cocaine, seized our reward system and turned modern humans into voluntary consumption machines. The chains of slavery in the Caribbean may be gone, but the biological addiction chains created by sugar are still around our wrists. The legacy of sugar is massive health expenditures, societies struggling with chronic diseases, and new generations whose sense of taste has been manipulated. The story of white gold is a massive tragedy that stretches from the jungles of New Guinea to our tables, with blood, profit, and greed at every step. Sugar is no longer just a taste in our tea, it is the biological foundation upon which modern civilization is built. So, is it possible to escape the captivity of this sweet poison? Or is the modern economy too weak to survive without this cycle of addiction created by sugar? We have reached the end of this journey where we examined the secret history of sugar. However, this is not an end. It is the beginning of a future reshaped with every sip and every bite. If you have gained a new perspective on the bloody and strategic history of sugar throughout this series, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts on this massive system in the comments. Join us in our journeys into the history of food by subscribing. Remember, knowledge is the greatest defense. See you in our next strategic analysis.